Hello everyone. Today I will be going over some chess basics, specifically dealing with opening principles. I will be covering 4 opening principles, beginning with developing your center pawns, then castling your king to safety. Third, I will be covering how to develop your pieces, and finally I'll be covering controlling the center of the board. So let's begin. First, with developing your center pawns. Now, you always want to ask why you want to do something. What's the advantage of doing it? Well, when developing your center pawns, you have to decide whether to develop your king pawn or your queen pawn. When developing your king pawn, the game tends to open up more and it gives you more room to attack with your pieces. Whereas if you develop with your queen pawn, the game is usually more closed and the pawns tend to block each other. So, as an example, let's say we develop with the king pawn. Now, when deciding whether to move 1 square or 2, generally it's better to move 2 squares forward, and that is because later on it helps you to get your pieces out faster. If you had moved this pawn to e3, then later it could have blocked in your c1 bishop and hindered your development. So we'll start with e4, and a good move for the opponent to play would be e5. And both of these moves, they allow you to further develop your pieces. And that brings me to castling the king to safety. By moving your center pawns, it allows you to get your pieces out faster, which in turn lets you castle your king quicker and bring it to safety. So a good second move would be knight to f3, which allows you to get closer to castling your king to safety, and it will cover our third principle of developing your pieces. So by moving knight to f3, I also attack the center, which is important because anybody who controls the center will have more access to the rest of the board for their pieces. So I'm attacking his e5 pawn, which will force him to move to knight to c6 to protect it. So far the game's about even. We've both developed a pawn to e4 and e5, knight to f3, and knight to c6. So my next move will be bishop to c4, which controls the center, develops a piece, and it allows me to castle on my next move if I want to. So a good move for black may be to also move his bishop out to control the center and to get closer to castling himself. So next, it would be good for me to go ahead and castle and get my king to safety, which is the second principle that I want to go over. After you've moved at least one of your center pawns and you start developing your pieces and you're able to castle, it's generally better to castle on the king side. One, because you can castle on that side faster. You only have to move 2 pieces out of the way to enable castling. So it's a little quicker than trying to castle queen side. And also by castling, your king can only be attacked head on or from the left side. Nothing can attack it from the right. Whereas if you left your king in the center, it can be attacked from 3 different directions, left, right, or center. So generally it's safer to castle as quick as you can. And then black may choose to move his knight to prepare castling. And he's also covering the center and attacking my pawn. So white may choose to protect his pawn by moving his pawn out, and it also allows a path for the c1 bishop to move. And then at this point, black is able to castle to safety. And then white continues his development. Generally, when developing your pieces, it's better to move knights before the bishops. So I'll choose to move knight to c3. And why is it better to move the knights before the bishops? Well, the bishop can travel the entire length of the board in one move, whereas a knight, to get from one side to the other, it takes quite a bit longer. So it's better to develop your knights towards the center, and from the center they have an easier time of moving on to either side of the board, whereas if you'd left them on the starting row or put them on the side of the board, it's just much more difficult for the knight to move into the action, wherever that may be. And now black may want to move his pawn in order to allow his bishop to develop on the next move. So then white may decide to develop his bishop next. And then he only has a queen and rooks left to develop. Black may decide to develop his bishop. Likewise, only queen and 2 rooks left to develop. And finally, white needs to get his queen off the back row at some point. So he could possibly just move here. Queen may do the same. And lastly, you can develop your rooks. Generally, it's good to develop them towards the center, behind pawns that have moved forward. And why is that a good thing to do? Well, as you push your pawns forward, they're more likely to be traded off. And once those are traded off, the rooks then have an open file that they may use to attack. So there you have it. We decided to cover 4 basic principles of the opening, and those are develop your center pawns. Why you do that by developing your center pawns, it enables you to develop your pieces and not block them in. It also controls the center. Then you want to castle your king to safety as quickly as possible. And from a castled position, the king is only able to be attacked from head on or one side, whereas if you leave the king in the middle, he can be attacked from 3 different directions, and it's not as safe. The third principle was to develop your pieces. And in doing that, it's generally better to develop your slower knights first, then your bishops, and then move your rooks to the center, possibly e1 or d1, and for black, e8 and d8. And the queen is usually best on the second row. You don't want to move the queen too far out where it may be in a position to be attacked by the opponent. And finally, throughout all these principles, you want to remember to control the center of the board, namely these four squares of d4, e4, d5, and e5. And you can control them by either placing pieces on them, such as this pawn on e4, or by placing your pieces where they attack those central squares. And hopefully by doing all of this, you survive the opening and are able to fight into the middle game. Thank you. Have a good day.